Caucus. This is an actual, thank you, I'll repeat again. Hi, I'm Becky Alexander, I'm chair of the Jewish Caucus, and this is an actual caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party. People have asked us, who are we, why are we doing this? One of our goals as a caucus is to make sure that we provide platforms for both our members and our friends and allies to engage in and with the Democratic Party in the state. And one of the ways to do that is to have a forum on candidates. And one of the reasons we're having a forum on an AG candidate is that because unlike perhaps a Senate race or even our governor, the Democratic sort of candidate is determined by the party in that convention. So we thought it was really, really important and integral that we provide a platform for our members who are hopefully going to go to the convention to hear. What we're going to do in the chat in a little bit is we'll put in, if you're not a member of the Michigan Democratic Party, it's free. You can become one. And you can sign up, and then following that, you can actually then participate and go to the convention, which is on April 19th. We'll give some information to everybody that's registered here today to make sure that you can. You have to make sure that you are a member of the party 30 days prior to the convention in April. So we want to make sure that we use this platform not just to inspire you and illuminate our candidates that are running for statewide office and Attorney General and next week our Secretary of State, but to also make sure you are a participant in our democratic process and participate in the convention. So this is twofold. We're going to be DJing a lot of stuff. That's kind of really where it is. As a caucus, we are doing this week, and then next week we're doing the Secretary of State. So we look forward to also having you there. Just an FYI for people coming on now, we have muted people as they came on. You can rename yourself, however. Additionally, we have closed the chat until the end. You will be able to post questions at the end. Our questions today were curated from members like you. We opened up forms and we had a forum and people had questions, and then we as our caucus curated them and we provided core themes to our candidates ahead of time. So they have a sense of the themes of the questions, but they don't have the specificity of the questions. If time permitting, we'll be able to ask some questions, and Adam Duberstein, who is on here, who's in our caucus, will be curating those and making sure those questions are also related to the themes that we already sort of put forth. That said, I think we're good. It's 6:35. I gave myself in my time, I run a show to 6:35. So for those coming on, welcome once again to our first candidate forum. We're so honored to do this. What we're going to do is I'm going to hand it over to the moderator of this forum, Joan Lowenstein, who is then going to sort of set you and facilitate the rest of this as well. So Joan, the show's for you.
Thank you, Decky. Hi, I'm Joan, and I'll be the moderator. I'm also on the board of Michigan Democratic Jewish Caucus. And like Decky, I'm also on the State Central Committee for Michigan Democratic Party, and we're all an official caucus of the Democratic Party. So what our rules are going to be is that we are going to have several of our members introduce the candidates. And then each candidate is going to have 2 minutes to share their key platform and philosophy. And then after that, we're going to have 3 curated questions. These were questions that we came up with some, as Decky said, suggestions from our members. And we looked at them too. Several of us are attorneys, and so we looked at them carefully. And then we're going to Decky's going to put those questions in the chat also so you can see what they are. Each candidate's going to be given 3 minutes to answer each question. Then I will also possibly follow up as moderator and give them pretty much equal time. We're going to be a little informal about all of that. It's not a debate. It's more of an informal forum, and so we will give people time to respond about things. And then, at the end, save your questions, write them down so that you can then put them in the chat at the end in case there's something that we haven't covered. And we're going to have a timekeeper who is Adam Duberstein. Adam is on here as also a member of our caucus, and he is going to hold up a little note when there's 30 seconds left. And so you'll be able to see Adam, and I will then bring out the large cane if you don't meet that 30 seconds and stop you. But as I said, it's a little bit informal, not so formal. So with that in mind, I think we can now go to our introductions. And the first introduction is going to be David Kramer, also a member of our caucus, who's going to introduce Karen McDonald.
Thanks, Joan. I appreciate it. I'm just pulling up my notes here. I'm excited to introduce my friend, Karen McDonald, who is the Oakland County prosecutor, my prosecutor. Karen grew up in a hardworking small town in Michigan, Portland, Michigan, taught her to stand up for others, a value that has guided her throughout her career as a teacher, judge, and now Oakland County prosecutor. Those lessons grew even deeper when she married her husband, Jeff, who's Jewish. Together, they are proud to have raised an interfaith family rooted in shared values of justice, dignity, and community. As prosecutor, Karen has made combating anti-Semitism and all forms of hate a defining priority. One of her major first initiatives was creating the first ever hate crimes unit in the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, a dedicated team of prosecutors trained to identify and combat hate crimes across the county. In 2022, she charged an individual with hate crimes for shouting anti-Semitic and racist slurs while driving through the Temple Bethel parking lot during preschool drop-off. I'm sure a lot of us remember that. In 2023, she charged another perpetrator with hate crimes and malicious destruction of a building after anti-Semitic graffiti was spray painted on the Woodward Shul in Royal Oak, Ferndale. She has aggressively pursued justice in 5 additional anti-Semitic hate crime cases in Oakland County, ensuring that threats and intimidation targeting Jewish residents are met with swift and serious consequences. Karen's commitment to protecting the Jewish community is grounded both in her public duty and in her personal life. She believes every Michigander, every family dropping off their child at preschool, every person walking in a synagogue, every community center serving its neighbors deserves to feel safe. Karen has a distinguished career in public service. Before being elected prosecutor, she served as family court judge for 7 years, an assistant prosecutor handling child sex assault cases, and a high school English teacher and MEA member. She also spent 9 years as a partner at Jaffe Rate, which is now Taft. She believes that her experience in both public service and the private sector is a strength. She has championed compassion, accountability, and fairness throughout her career, from reviewing every juvenile lifer case in Oakland County to creating specialized units for hate crimes, human trafficking, and wrongful convictions. And of course, she prosecuted the Crumbleys in a landmark gun violence case. Karen's campaign for AG has already earned broad and diverse support. She's been endorsed by the Michigan Education Association, Council of Baptist Pastors of Detroit and Vicinity, Emily's List, UA Local 85 Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, and many more. She has built a coalition that reflects the statewide confidence in her integrity, courage, and commitment to protecting all Michigan communities. Karen lives in Metro Detroit with her husband, Jeff, has raised 5 children. As Attorney General, Karen will continue to fight for a Michigan where every community, including the Jewish community, is protected, respected, and able to live safely and proudly.
Thanks, David. Next, we're going to have our caucus member, Debbie Rosenman, introduce Ellie Savit.
Thanks so much. A born and raised Michigander, Ellie is a former public school teacher, civil rights and public interest lawyer, and law clerk to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ellie Savit is currently in his 2nd term as the elected Washtenaw County prosecutor, where he has transformed the office into a national leader in facilitating fair and equitable justice. In addition, Ellie has had a track record as prosecutor of standing up for people when the chips are down. In 2022, he litigated alongside Governor Whitmer to invalidate Michigan's archaic criminal abortion ban. He led a coalition of police and prosecutors from across the nation to protect reproductive rights in the United States Supreme Court. And since the Trump administration has taken office, he has litigated alongside cities and counties from across the nation to challenge such unlawful federal actions as the Birthright Citizenship Executive Order, federal firings and funding cuts, attempts to deny SNAP benefits, and attempts to send the military into American cities. In addition to his prosecutorial experience, he has litigated major cases against corporate polluters, scammers, and slumlords. In addition to litigating civil rights cases, he has successfully sued the opioid industry. He spearheaded the city of Detroit's legal efforts in the landmark Right to Literacy lawsuit on behalf of the Detroit school children. And he has worked as a practicing environmental lawyer in major successful cases against DuPont, Chemours, and other corporate polluters. A steadfast champion for working families, Ellie created the only economic justice unit in the prosecutor's office in Michigan, which focuses on worker and consumer protection. He recently received the 2025 Frank Kelly Consumer Advocacy Award in recognition of his work on behalf of Michigan consumers. A longtime critic of our broken campaign finance system, Ellie has never taken a corporate PAC check and is committed to the Attorney General's office that works solely for the people.
Thanks, Debbie. And last will be our Washtenaw County former Water Resources Commissioner Janice Bobrin to introduce Mark Totten.
Thank you, Joan. It's very much an honor for me to introduce Mark Totten today and let you know why he's uniquely qualified for the AG position. Mark grew up in Kalamazoo, with a single mother and teacher. He attended Yale Law School, and after that he joined the U.S. Department of Justice. He went on to clerk in the D.C. Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals. Then Mark came back to Michigan, where he taught at Michigan State University College of Law, focusing particularly on criminal law and consumer protection law. He also served as a special assistant U.S. attorney during that time. In 2018, Governor Whitmer asked Mark to serve as her chief legal counsel, where he spent more than 3 years and led critical fights like the governor's successful effort to protect reproductive freedom in Michigan, defending the 2020 elections. And for those of you who are familiar with it, he's been the lead fighting against Line 5, the aging Canadian pipeline that represents the single greatest threat to our Great Lakes. In 2022, President Biden nominated Mark to serve as the U.S. Attorney for Michigan's Western District. He held that position, which is essentially the chief federal law enforcement agent for 49 of Michigan's 83 counties until last January 20th. In that job, he prosecuted many of the very worst crimes in Michigan, including anti-Semitic attacks and white supremacists. He also reached out to the communities that he served, creating personal relationships with all of the prosecuting attorneys. And in the face of rising anti-Semitic incidents, he made it his job to meet and get to know the Jewish community leaders and religious leaders across the district. I'm hopeful he'll tell you more about that work, but when indeed the FBI brought him in on a threat to a synagogue in East Lansing, Mark knew and was able to reach out to the rabbi and let her know what was going on and to successfully prosecute the case. It's Mark's experience at the federal and state levels that truly set him apart and make him the most qualified to lead. At a time when the federal government itself is the single biggest threat to our freedoms and rights as Michigan citizens, Having someone who knows the federal justice system, as Mark does, has never been so important. And by serving as the governor's legal counsel, Mark's learned how to navigate that huge bureaucracy that is state government and how to get things done. I believe he's uniquely qualified to hit the ground running from his first day in office. And just one more thing that I'll add, Mark has accepted the challenge to take no money from our state utilities, DTE and Consumer Power, who've really been running roughshod over the legislature in Lansing and not to the benefit of Michigan citizens and ratepayers. Thank you.
Thanks, Janice. Now, each candidate will have 2 minutes to talk about their own philosophy, make an introduction. And so we will start with Karen McDonald.
Thank you. Thanks so much to the Michigan Democratic Jewish Caucus. I have been participating and supporting since it began, and it's extremely important. I appreciate you putting this together. David did such a good job with my introduction. I don't want to be repetitive, but I think the thing that I'd like you to remember the most is also the thing that probably distinguishes me from anyone else in this race, and that is I grew up in a very working class community and a working class home. Parents weren't college educated, and their dream was to send all 3 of their daughters to college. And I remember at the dinner table one night asking why we were Democrats. And I remember my older sister actually saying, well, because the Democratic Party helps people and they care about all the people, even the people who can't defend themselves. And one of the big reasons I made the decision to run for Attorney General, because I like the job I have and I'm the highest law enforcement official in the 2nd largest county in the state, is that we need to get back to being seen as the party of the people and all the people. I'm proud of the work I've done. I have a history both as the prosecutor, a former judge, a private practice lawyer, and a teacher, of making really tough decisions when there's not going to be, everyone's not going to be happy. And that's what we need. We need a leader who has experience and the courage of making really tough calls, but ensuring the people that you serve that you are going to make the right call and you're going to do it for the right reasons. There's so much concern and fear and hate right now, and it's happening right before our very eyes every single day. And we need a trusted leader who can make tough decisions, not just about what lawsuits to file, but about the experience of actually being in the courtroom, of actually presiding over trials like I have been in the judge, and also presiding over the 2nd largest prosecutor's office in the whole state and the 2nd largest county. And I will bring that experience of strength and skill and hopefully a lot of wisdom to the Attorney General's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We'll next go to Ellie Savit to give an introduction.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to the caucus for holding this important forum. As a proud Jewish Michigan Democrat, it is particularly great to be here with you all tonight. I echo Karen actually in giving credit to Debbie for the very thorough and kind introduction. So I won't go into too much of my background. Instead, I'll focus on what I hope to achieve in the Attorney General's office. We are at a point right now where American democracy, in my view, is really teetering. And the Attorney General position, as the one position in the state that can go into court and sue on behalf of Michiganders when the Trump administration violates the laws, when our civil liberties are at risk, is a tremendously important position. That has to be the top priority of the next Attorney General. It is something that I will do. It's something that I already have experience doing. As Debbie mentioned, we've been involved in litigation efforts against the Trump administration since literally day one of this administration when he issued his racist and unconstitutional birthright citizenship order. And I will continue to fight hard with everything that I have to preserve our democracy, preserve our democratic norms, and hold this administration accountable. But we can't lose sight of the other major challenges that we face in these times. We are seeing an era of rising and economic inequality, which threatens to be exacerbated in the very near future by AI, which can be used to price gouge consumers, which is going to create potentially job losses, which is already being used by employers to surveil workers and engage in wage theft. We need an attorney general who is going to focus on that. And I will say this, these two prongs fit together. Because we know that in periods of economic pain and economic uncertainty like we are experiencing right now, folks have two options historically. One is they listen to demagogues like Donald Trump, who seek to divide us and turn us against each other. And that is where democracy falls. The other is that we can stand together, we can work together, we can come together to build an economy and a Michigan in which everybody has an opportunity to thrive. That is where we can ultimately move forward. And that is what meeting this moment's demands. I will fight tooth and nail, both for our democracy, for economic security, for our planet's future as Attorney General. And as Debbie so kindly introduced me as, I am somebody that has the experience doing all of that stuff, fighting for civil rights, fighting for environmental protection, fighting for worker and consumer protection, in addition to my experience as a prosecutor. That is what sets me apart in this race, and that is the perspective that I will bring to this job.
Thanks, Ellie. And last, Mark. And in case I mentioned that before that Adam is keeping time, so he's going to be holding up a little slip of paper when you have 30 seconds left. I think I might have forgotten to mention that. If you want to keep an eye on that guy in the box. Thanks. So please go ahead and introduce yourself, Mark. Let's see. Do we have you unmuted? Let me make sure.
Okay, there I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all so much for having me. I want to say thanks to our organizers, Decky and Joan and others who have put this together, and the dozens of you that are taking time out of your schedule to be here. I think it's a really important conversation, and I'm really glad to be here. I want to start by just saying what everybody on this call knows, that we are living in an unprecedented moment in our nation's history. We have a president who is seeking to actively undermine our democracy. And probably the most important thing I can say today is that if I am privileged to be the next Attorney General, my number one priority is to use every power I have in this office to stop the president. I think number two follows closely from that. I know we're going to talk more about priorities, so I won't expand on it now, but is to try to fill the gaps that have been left by the fact that in so many key areas, federal law enforcement has walked away, protecting civil rights, protecting workers, protecting consumers as well. You know, I thought I would just wrap up the 2 minutes I have by maybe echoing something Janice kindly said in her few words, and that is to say, I think at the particular moment with the threats that we're facing, I think I bring a couple things to the table. First of all, I think I bring to the table a very deep experience in state government and an understanding of how to get things done. For nearly 4 years, I served as the governor's chief legal counsel. I worked with every single department in state government and none more than the Department of Attorney General. And my job so often was to try to figure out how to get things done in state government. Some knowledge and a set of skills that you only get by being on the job. And I will bring that with me so that I can hit the ground running. And I think the other thing I would say is that I have deep experience in the federal government. I've served now at the Department of Justice 3 times, most recently as the chief federal law enforcement officer of the U.S. Attorney across 49 of our counties. And I've done so at a moment when I think our biggest threat is the federal government. So I look forward to the conversation tonight. Thanks again for having me. And I'll turn it back over to Joan.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So in answering these questions, I'll be juggling who speaks first. So nobody is going to be the first one to talk every time. Just wanted to let you know that. Our first question is about hate crimes. Hate crimes and anti-Semitism in particular are on the rise, as we all know. I think if you've been following the news, there was just yesterday an arson attack against the only synagogue in Jackson, Mississippi. In the Jewish community, we have seen actually reductions in promised federal and state funding for security. So what would you do as Attorney General to ensure community safety? And I'll start with Ellie. Oh, we've got to unmute each person. I think, Laura, you're going to be in charge of that.
Thank you. So look, the first thing that the Attorney General needs to do in order to combat hate crimes is to prosecute hate crimes. And I will do so as Attorney General. I was proud to support Representative Arbit's recent bills that passed through the legislature, which significantly strengthened our hate crimes laws, as well as provided for criminal penalties for institutional desecration. When those bills were up, I submitted comment to the legislature, and I was proud to support them. And we now have hate crimes laws in Michigan that are able to be wielded in a way that they weren't before to address these horrific crimes. And let me just talk about why I think hate crimes targeting any community, and the Jewish community has been at the forefront of experiencing hate crimes recently, is so important. The reason that hate crimes are particularly heinous, the reason that we have laws criminalizing hate crimes specifically, is because the victims of hate crimes are not limited simply to those who directly experience the violence or the property destruction or the attacks from that crime. It affects an entire community. The point of hate crimes is to instill fear and a sense that a particular group of people does not belong, and that needs to be treated seriously. It needs to be prosecuted. It needs to be prosecuted as a hate crime, and I will do so using the Hate Crimes Division in the Attorney General's office. But the other thing that Joan mentioned is this. We need more resources, not just to prosecute hate crimes, to investigate hate crimes, but also to provide security for religious institutions, for institutions that serve minority communities that are so frequently the target of hate crimes. We have seen this administration take a sledgehammer to federal funding, which protects exactly these communities, exactly the communities that are targeted so frequently by hate crimes. And look, I mentioned this at the start. I was proud to join in with prosecutors and government leaders from across the nation to challenge just these funding cuts in court, because it makes us all significantly less safe. So we need the resources, ideally, to prevent hate crimes from happening in the first place, to provide security for religious institutions, for institutions that serve vulnerable groups. And then when hate crimes do occur, we absolutely need to prosecute them zealously, because in my view, because of the communal-wide effect, there is no crime so heinous as one that is based on someone's religion, somebody's race, somebody's sexual orientation, sex, gender identity, and that must be a priority for the next Attorney General, and it will be for me.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Mark Totten to answer the same thing, and let me know if there's any part of my question that you want me to repeat.
Thanks so much, Joan. So if I can, I'd like to answer this question by speaking a little bit about what I've done. So I became U.S. Attorney in May of 2022. And as I was quickly coming up to speed, one of the things that I was doing was reviewing data about my district and what was happening in areas where I had authority across the nation. Sometime in the fall of 2022, the FBI's hate incident statistics came across my desk. And as I was looking through it, I was just really taken aback by the fact that across the board, hate crimes were significantly increasing, but in no area more than in anti-Semitism. And so I made a decision that I was really going to focus on trying to get ahead of this in case something happened in my district. I started by meeting with Gary Sikorsky, who is the director of Jewish Community Security He became a very close partner. We had ongoing communication. And the thing that Gary did for me that was just so helpful was that he connected me with Jewish communities all across my district. I met with Jewish leaders in person and often brought the FBI along with me in Grand Rapids, in Kalamazoo, in Lansing. I went over to South Haven, Traverse City. I went up to Petoskey, and then up in the UP to Marquette. And then I also sat down with folks in Houghton and Hancock. And then in the years that followed, the 3 years that I was in office, I ended up prosecuting multiple anti-Semitic hate crime cases. One of them involved a young man named Nathan Whedon. He was a member of a white supremacist group called The Base. In a operation he called Operation Kristallnacht, he went out late one night and he put neo-Nazi symbols all around Temple Jacob in Hancock, Michigan. And I will tell you, I was incredibly proud to sit in that federal courtroom in Marquette, Michigan, when a randomly selected group of jurors came back in 47 minutes, incredibly fast, and issued a verdict of guilty, which sent a very strong message that hate is not acceptable in Michigan. Another case that we had involved another young man named Sean Pitola. So one of the people I had sat down with when I was really trying to build relationships early on was Rabbi Amy Bigman in East Lansing. She's the rabbi at Congregation Shari Zedek. We exchanged phone numbers. We agreed to stay in touch. And 8 days after that conversation, I was up in northern Michigan. And without realizing this was going to happen, I was making a call to Rabbi Bigman. I asked her to sit down because I told her I was going to share something with her deeply troubling. And I told her that we had just arrested a young man named Sean Pitola who was preparing a mass shooting at her synagogue. And that's what I'll do as AG. I will build the team, I will deeply engage communities, and I will prosecute hate crimes.
Thank you. And Karen, you're next.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. You know, the hate crime statutes and the tools we have to prosecute those cases, we prosecute hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases a year. The hate crime charge is one that I need to personally oversee. And the reason I personally approve those charges is we have to start educating people, my prosecutors, law enforcement, about what does it look like? What does a hate crime look like? Because oftentimes it comes in as an assault and battery or a malicious destruction of property. In the case of the Temple Bethel case, Gary Sikorsky, who Mark just mentioned, was actually serving on the foundation and commission that I put together on gun violence, and was out in the hall on that day taking a call about it. And I asked him what was happening, and he told me. When it was presented to the office, somehow in the conversation we didn't include that this was a preschool. It wasn't just a temple. It wasn't open to the public, and it was early in the morning, and I know that because my children went there. And I set that scene for my own team. Like, let's look at this. We have somebody showing up at a place where moms and dads are dropping off their preschool children, and it was solely to scare and frighten. But I didn't just make that call. I also sat in front of hundreds of people at Temple Bethel at a forum and answered those questions about what are we going to do to keep this community safe. And I don't just protect and do that within the Jewish community. I do it in all of the communities. And I've charged hate crimes in where victims in other communities are, because we have to call it out. We have to call it out every time, because right now we are living in a culture of fear. All of us are afraid. And it's the top law enforcement official of the state that will offer what we need the most, which is strength and courage and good decision making, and then being accountable for those decisions. The AG has the ability to address hate crimes that extend past county lines, not just certain part of the state, but all over the state. And those are arguably some of the most important cases to prosecute, because those involve a county-wide act in concert against a certain group of people, and anti-Semitism is indeed on the rise. And I'll say that, I think that charging a case is fine, but I've actually stood in courtrooms my whole life and litigated them. And I think I stand out in that. And I think you can agree with the decisions I made or not, but nobody in my county will tell you that I'm afraid to make them and to take on tough fights.
Thank you. For our next question, in Michigan, we have been lucky enough to have Dana Nessel, who has joined with attorney generals around the nation to fight anti-democratic executive orders. What is your philosophy about challenging federal actions or state actions, such as the controversy over whether data centers should be subject to hearings? And can you give examples of lawsuits that have been going on already that you agree or disagree with in this kind of tension between state and federal actions and laws? So let's start with Mark. Uh-oh, we need to get him unmuted again here.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So, I think, as I mentioned, I think this is going to be, especially in terms of challenging the federal government, the single most important challenge for the next attorney general. It certainly is going to be my priority. The AGs are better positioned than anyone in the United States in many, many cases to be able to bring actions against the federal government. And I think that we have to be very vigilant. I mean, what's happening right now, especially in terms of the opposition to the Trump administration, there's a real division of labor. The state attorneys general are working together very closely. One of my former colleagues, Nick Brown, used to be U.S. attorney out in Seattle, is now the attorney general in the state of Washington. He raised his hand even before Trump was elected to take a birthright citizenship case, and he was able to drop that complaint as soon as that executive order was signed. And so I'm going to want to be part of that effort. I'm going to want to try to strengthen that effort, have Michigan not only sign on, but also lead in key cases where we are especially well equipped. And the cases are coming fast and heavy. I mean, we certainly are seeing some cases. We saw this in the state of Illinois and the state of Oregon, challenging the president's use of military force. We have to take that very seriously, certainly for what that means for the communities who would be subject to the military being deployed in their cities, and also for the implications that might have in the future. You can just imagine the effects that it will have if there are military deployed around police stations. Around polling places during an election. And we have to always be thinking down the road of what might happen. I think of the recent example right now of what we saw, the horrible incident in Minneapolis. I've said many times, and I'll say it again, that as the state attorney general, I will not hesitate to enforce state criminal law against any officers, including federal officers, who act outside the scope of their lawful authority. And that's certainly a role that I'll play to enforce state criminal law as well, reviewing all the facts, following the evidence wherever it leads, but taking that responsibility very, very seriously. And we've seen, just as one more example, we've seen a number of efforts where the federal government has denied really, really important funds to state governments that have already been committed, whether that's SNAP benefits, which they threatened to cut, whether that is funding for our research universities who are doing cutting edge, life-saving medical research. And our attorney general stepped up, has joined those suits, has led some of them. And I think that's exactly what we need to continue doing when the president threatens, when the president harms Michiganders, and when he violates the law.
Thank you. And next we will go to, let's see, let's go to Karen.
Great, thank you. We get asked a form of this question every time we're on a panel together, and every time there are more lawsuits that needed to be filed, and thankfully we have an attorney general now that's willing to do that. The attorneys general of each state They are the only backstop to what is happening right now, which is scarier and scarier every day. Her lawsuits and lawsuits that I fully support, which she's the only one as the AG that can take that action to protect our school funding, our health care, consumer protections, our civil rights. I'm very concerned about what's going to happen with voting and what the federal government might do. I'm very concerned about the consumer protections with data centers, but also what AI will and could pose in terms of danger to everyday people. These are, and by the way, the out of the White House, their message is we don't want any regulation. That really just puts people in danger. And I think part of the most important job that the AG has is standing the line and making sure that we are fighting back, because if we don't have an attorney general that will do that, believe it or not, it really won't matter who our governor is. We are going to be in a state of absolute crisis. But I think it's also making determinations about what's in the best interest of our state. We've got people who are not going to be able to afford healthcare. We have people like somebody that, the Karen McDonald, the 10-year-old Karen McDonald of the present, who is not going to have the choices that I did and the opportunities. Was it a lot harder than a lot of people? Yeah, I didn't get to go to the school I chose. I had to go to the one I could afford and get student loans and all of those things. But are those opportunities there for that 10-year-old now? I don't think so. Not when the federal government's trying to take away funding for public schools and trying to take away health care and all these opportunities, or protect our air and our resources. I'm afraid, and that's why I'm in this race. And I think the Attorney General has to be able to take those strong, courageous steps and provide real leadership for the state and let everyone know that I'm here to protect all the people, all the people. And yes, we need to have business come to Michigan, but not on the backs of people who are vulnerable and cannot bear one more fear that they can't afford to feed their families and they can't trust the air they breathe.
Thanks, Karen. And last we'll have Ellie.
So the question is my philosophy on lawsuits and when the Attorney General should bring them or join them. And I will be very, very clear on this. My philosophy is I don't care who it is that is screwing the people of the state of Michigan over. Whether it is a corporate polluter, whether it is a boss who's stealing from their workers, whether it is an antiquated and archaic state law that needs to be struck down, or right now in this moment, whether it is the President of the United States himself, I will be there in court representing the people of the state of Michigan against that unlawful harm, because the Attorney General has no more important clients than the people of this state. In terms of the federal litigation, it was mentioned in the question, we are so fortunate right now to have our current Attorney General, Dana Nessel, be engaged in this litigation. This really matters, and it really matters particularly in light of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision last summer in the birthright citizenship case, in which it basically said, if your state is not involved in this litigation, you are not going to get the relief as your state that could be issued by lower courts. And as a result of AG Nessel's, I'm sure this data point is outdated by now, but as a result of Michigan being involved in these suits, we have recovered over $2 billion that would have otherwise been lost for people in the state of Michigan. So there cannot be any more important priority right now than fighting back against that. In terms of specific cases, look, I just say, look at what we have already been involved in. I am not somebody who's just saying, I promise that I'm going to start fighting back against this when you make me Attorney General come January 1st, 2027. We in the prosecutor's office, we have already met the moment. Like I said, we've joined with coalitions of cities and counties across the nation to fight back against this administration's efforts to trample on our civil rights, efforts to remove key funding, efforts to send the military into the streets of the American cities. I know how to work with partners. We've been doing it for years, not just against this administration, but in other important constitutional crises, like when Roe versus Wade was overturned and emergency room medicine threatened to be taken away across the country, we led a coalition of police and prosecutor leaders in the United States Supreme Court to seek to preserve emergency access to abortion care. At the state level, the same is true. The Attorney General needs to be involved in efforts to strengthen our Consumer Protection Act, protect our environment, and protect workers. And again, I'll point to my track record on this. Dana Nessel is currently litigating a case up at the Michigan Supreme Court, which would seek to revitalize Michigan's Consumer Protection Act. I've led a coalition of 17 elected prosecutors across the state to support her in that effort. I'm not just somebody that's promising that I'm going to do this. I've got the track record of fighting back on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan when the chips are down.
Thank you. And I want to follow up, and I'll give each of you a chance to respond. I think a couple of you mentioned the case that's really on everybody's mind right now, which is this killing that occurred in Minnesota with the ICE agent. And as I'm sure all of you know from reading the news, the federal government has been trying to keep the local officials from actually investigating or doing anything, getting any access to the evidentiary materials or what's been happening with this case. So kind of creatively speaking, because it's not a well-settled area of law. Ellie, let me start with you. What can a local attorney, a state attorney general do in a case like that where you have action by a federal agent?
Yeah, so look, the law on this is actually very clear. Federal law enforcement officers simply are not immune categorically from state criminal law. They have a federal officer immunity defense that they can raise in court once they have already been charged, but they're not exempt from state law. And if the state believes that there's enough evidence to bring charges, they can indeed charge that federal officer, including with murder. Now, what's disturbing, there's so much that is disturbing about what happened in Minnesota, but it appears that the federal government has made the decision to block the state from completing an investigation. Usually when you have something like this that happens, an officer-involved shooting, you have law enforcement agencies working together to get to the truth, to uncover what happened. And we've seen the opposite from that from the federal government right now. And look, I don't think anybody expects that there's going to be federal charges in this. I want to say this clearly, though, even in the face of federal obstruction, that does not stop the state from conducting its own investigation. We saw, I think it was today or yesterday, the Minnesota Attorney General and the Hennepin County Attorney announced that they were indeed going to move forward with their own investigation, whether the federal government cooperated or not. They can do that. They can talk to witnesses. We've all seen video evidence in that case. And we need to send a strong message that nobody is above the law, even federal officers, and that is exactly what I will do as Attorney General. I want to just mention one more thing about ICE and what happened in Minnesota. In a lot of ways, I must say that this was both tragic and inevitable, because we have seen the way ICE is operating in our communities, hiding behind masks, operating out of unmarked vehicles, taking people off the street without markings on their uniforms. It was only a matter of time before somebody got hurt or killed. And this has been exacerbated by the US Supreme Court's decision to allow ICE to engage in blatant racial profiling. Yes, at a state level, we need to be holding federal officers accountable when the moment demands it and the evidence dictates. But in addition to that, we need to be fighting back against the way in which ICE is operating in our communities, including wearing masks, including operating out of unmarked vehicles, and including engaging in blatant racial profiling. And that gets back to the previous question with federal litigation. I will absolutely do both of those things as Attorney General.
Thanks. Karen, do you want to chime in on this and explain what you would do in this kind of a situation?
I do. You know, in my capacity as the Oakland County prosecutor, we handle reviews of charges submitted or any review of officer involved shootings, and we have done that several times. I have experience doing this. When I took office, there was no stated protocol or best practice. It was basically one or two people making the decision whether a charge should be brought after an investigation was done. And I did not believe that was right. It's not best practice. You have to have a coalition of people, some in law enforcement, some as prosecutors, all examining the evidence and deciding whether or not a charge is appropriate. But the most important thing is that the investigation is credible. And in order for it to be credible, it has to be independent. I'm not sure I would agree with Ellie that officers routinely work together or law enforcement agencies on these types of cases. There is always tension because a shooting has occurred and law enforcement sometimes does not see eye to eye. But that's where the role of the prosecutor and the attorney general can really provide leadership and independence in making the call. Again, they're tough calls. And then being responsible to the people that you're making that those decisions are going to affect, like the victims and their families and law enforcement. With regard to what's going on with ICE, I'm handling this almost in real time. We have ICE in Oakland County. We had an incident where there was an ICE pursuit around the Clarkston schools. We are very vigilant about working with our law enforcement partners in making sure that we are not violating any law, but we are also not making a bad situation even worse. When you are stopping people because of the color of their skin or knocking on doors or claiming things that cannot be justified and there's no probable cause, it's not right, and it creates danger and it creates fear. And so we issued a statement and worked with superintendents and schools so that we can advise them of what their rights are. What's happening right now is just throwing out the rules, throwing out the Constitution, throwing out due process. And the Attorney General is so critical right now because not only is the AG the only person that can really take action, but they also have a voice. And providing that leadership is so important. Minnesota absolutely has jurisdiction, and so does Minneapolis, to both investigate and charge crimes that occur within their jurisdiction. And while it is abhorrent and unfortunate and just so damaging that our federal government is not only rushing to judgment about whether that was a justified shooting before investigations even done, they're taking steps to block evidence. There is a lot that still can be done, and they cannot tell the state of Minnesota or the city that they don't have jurisdiction because they do. And again, we're not always happy with the decisions that the courts make, but for the most part, we have been successful in those challenges because it's the Constitution of the United States.
Thanks. And Mark, you've also worked in federal government. So what do you see as the solution, and what are some solutions to this kind of issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start out by just echoing that this was bound to happen with the way ICE is operating. And I'm almost certain, although it is extremely tragic and I don't want to see it happen, that it's going to occur again and again and again. You know, I talk from time to time. I've worked with dozens and dozens of federal law enforcement agents. Many of them I keep in touch with, and I hear again and again that they are appalled at what they're seeing and that these practices so often violate the best practices for law enforcement and how they conduct themselves. So there's really two issues here that my colleagues have identified. One of them is the charging of state crimes. The other one is the access to evidence. I'll just start and say something quickly about the first one. In terms of the charging, you know, first of all, the state is a separate sovereign in our system and has the ability to charge violations of state criminal law. The statements you've seen by Secretary Noem that this officer enjoyed absolute immunity, that's her language, is just absolutely false as a matter of federal law. Yes, there is a measure of immunity for a federal officer who acts within the scope of their lawful authority, and that will be a decision finally made by a federal court. But not everything that an agent does satisfies that, and that will be the very important question, if this makes it into court, if there are state charges, that a federal judge will have to answer. And the second issue, of course, is just the access to evidence. There is often tension for sure, but it is extraordinary and alarming that the federal government has altogether pushed the state prosecutors, the state law enforcement officers in Minnesota out of the investigation. And there are creative ways, if they wanted to, that they could try to extend that. They could initiate a grand jury, and that would give them some more cover, but they cannot finally deny access to that evidence. This is really novel ground, but I can very much see a federal court taking up that issue and deciding it if the federal government decides to finally deny access to the state. So there's some uncharted grounds here, but this is a fight I'm afraid we're going to see again and again.
Thank you. I'm sure we all learned something from all of those answers. I know I did. We have a last question, and after this question, we are going to open up our chat for people to send in questions to Adam if they have additional questions or follow-ups to some of the things that we've asked. But our last question is really about the area that's commonly called restorative justice. So can you address your position about long sentences, especially for juveniles, and balancing the public safety and victims' rights with sentencing, bail reform, judicial reform, all of those issues that we're all very invested in, but we realize that there's a tension between the public safety and civil rights. And we'll start with Karen.
Thank you. One of the reasons I left being a judge to run for prosecutor was my passion for criminal justice reform. And that really was rooted at treating people in a way that both was humane, but also just made sense. Incarcerating people for long periods of time for low-level crimes, treating kids like they're adults. It's not humane, and it also doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make us safer. So I'm very proud of what I've done in the prosecutor's office. When I took office, I established a conviction integrity unit, and they have taken on very big investigations, and we have given real relief to real people who are now on the street, who were incarcerated wrongly. I also reviewed and changed positions from my predecessor on the remaining juvenile lifers that were there. I have had to make really tough decisions when it comes to kids. And then recently the law changed and we were asked as prosecutors to review every single case where someone was serving a life without parole sentence under the age of 21. That was about 100 cases that my team and I personally reviewed with not a lot of tools and ways to determine. And so obviously our first goal has to be public safety. And that involves really difficult conversations with victims of crime. But we have to get really smart about what we're doing and why. And my emphasis on our juvenile justice division, we are in schools. We are actively seeking and building a restorative justice program. We have looked at ways and are engaging, and for the first time ever have a whole position that is of an administrator that just focuses on our diversion programs and our problem-solving courts. Because if we don't address the underlying reasons why people are in the criminal justice system, we're never going to get better. We're never going to be safer. And I think traditionally prosecutors look at this like they see a crime and they charge it and they ask for the highest sentence. But I believe that prevention and finding the root of what's causing this is not only why I get up in the morning, but I also think it makes sense as a top law enforcement official. And so everything that we've done in my office has been in that same vein. I'm really proud of the work that we do. I think it's really difficult to make public safety your priority and also be committed to fair and just prosecution, which is why it's rarely done, but I've done it and I do it every day, and it is really difficult. And it involves making really tough calls, but I'm the first ever prosecutor to actually come from a understanding as not just a prosecutor, but also the juvenile justice system. And we just tend to focus on juveniles who commit crimes, but we also are responsible for all of the abuse and neglect cases in Oakland County. And kids who are removed from their home are 7 times more likely to be the victims of crime, that to be subject to suicide, homelessness, criminology. And so the focus there is also really important, and I think it gets overlooked a lot.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Ellie for that question.
Yeah, and it's such an important question, and it's important for this reason. The criminal justice system is the apex of the power that the government has over somebody's life. You're talking about the need to preserve public safety, but on the other side, with the defendant, you are talking about their potential loss of liberty, right? Potentially for a very, very long period of time. And it is important that we act to protect public safety, but do so in a way that does not impose any more restrictions than is necessary to do so. And that has been my guiding light as prosecutor. I'll just mention a few things that we have done. One is, for these reasons, for the reasons I just mentioned, I believe that the most grievous error that the system can make, that the government can make, is to wrongfully convict somebody and send somebody to prison for a crime that they did not commit. So we started a conviction integrity and expungement unit in the prosecutor's office in Washtenaw County, and I'm proud that we have remedied wrongful convictions and let out of prison people that in fact did not commit the crime that they had been sitting behind bars for. The expungement side of that unit's work is also really important because we have really good laws in Michigan that allow people to clear old criminal records when they've stayed out of trouble for a period of years and have done everything that we asked them to do. And that's important because we know that a criminal record prohibits people from getting jobs and from securing housing and from continuing their educational opportunities. But so frequently, a lawyer is going to charge you $2,000 to help you out with your expungement application. And the number one reason you want an expungement is to get a job. If you don't have the job, you don't have the $2,000, you can't get the job until your record is expunged. So we said, why are we doing it this way? And I'm proud that in Washtenaw County, working with coalition partners, we have been able to provide over 1,000 people expungement-related services absolutely free of charge, so that those who have gone through the justice system and have done everything we've asked them to do don't bear that cross around their neck for the rest of their lives. Prevention is also important. We treat every case individually and we try to seek outcomes that work, but we've also worked with community groups, groups like Washtenaw My Brother's Keeper, which provides mentorship to from older men of color to younger men of color to divert kids out of the juvenile justice system. And of those that have participated in that program, not one has re-offended. We do work on community violence interruption because the best way outcome for a gun violence case is that it never happens in the first place. And they've done phenomenal work there. We work in partnership there. And the other thing I will mention is we started Michigan's only pre-plea diversion program in the state of Michigan. We had to get special dispensation from the scale and the Supreme Court to do it. And we have had over 200 people go through pre-plea diversion, which allows them to avoid any sort of plea of guilty if they access rehabilitative services, if they do what we ask. And that program has a recidivism rate of literally 0%. Not a single person who has successfully completed that program has reoffended. So we can do both, protect public safety and promote rehabilitation in the justice system. That's what I've done in Washtenaw County. That's what I'll promote as AG.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Mark.
You know, as a prosecutor, our job is not to maximize the number of prosecutions, maximize the length of a sentence. It really is to secure justice. And part of that responsibility is to also be leaders in reforming a system that in many ways needs very, very significant reforms. And so I'd like to just talk a little bit about the work I've done in the roles I've had to try to do that. And I'll start first with my work with the governor and then say something about my role leading the U.S. Attorney's Office. You know, I was with the governor really from the very first couple weeks, I jumped onto a project to help bring what ended up being the most significant criminal justice reform in the state of Michigan through legislation in really a generation. It was a package of bills called the Jail and Pretrial Detention Reform Package that was focused on trying to make sure that when we were keeping people detained, that we were doing it in a smart way that kept people safe, and that we weren't keeping people detained who did not pose a threat to people's safety. And we also focused on a bunch of laws that just didn't make sense, like taking away somebody's driver license for an offense that just had nothing to do with driving. And so I was proud we had to work across the aisle in this work. Remember, the Republicans had the legislature for the first 4 years, and we were able to pass it. And as soon as that was done, I went to the governor, went to the lieutenant governor. I said, let's turn to juvenile justice. We have a very broken system in Michigan. The data all showed it. And we launched a task force. I worked really, really hard behind the scenes to bring Republicans on board. I was told at first that they were a little exhausted with criminal justice reform, but we were able to pull it across the line. And in 2023, the governor signed a package that made huge reforms in our juvenile criminal justice, with a focus away from just mere detention and also providing really strong mental health supports. As U.S. Attorney, I realized very quickly that we had that people were routinely being sent away for incredibly long drug offense sentences with no where there was no violence involved. And so I put in place some policies. I made sure that we were reserving charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences for only the most serious crimes. And I also, and this may seem kind of straightforward, but I also put in place a policy that said, look, if we believe the sentence for anybody who is being sentenced should be below the recommendation, we need to say that. Because our job is ultimately to secure justice, and that just wasn't the culture in my office, and that was something I changed as well. I think criminal justice is a really important role for the next Attorney General, and it's one I've been proud to work on for the past several years.
Thank you. We have opened up the chat for questions in case anyone has questions, and Adam Duberstein is going to look at the questions and then let me know if there are any. So be sure, if you have a question, to send that message to him in the chat. I don't know if we have any yet, Adam.
We do.
Okay. Why don't you, we'll let you be the curator, and you can state the question, and then I will throw it to our participants to let them answer.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. This is the first question. As we confront the threat of administrative overreach onto academic freedom at universities across the state and the nation, specifically through the use of fiscal leveraging, we must also acknowledge the real and present threat of anti-Semitism facing Jewish students on campus. Given this tension, what role should the Michigan Attorney General play in coordinating with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights on Title VI investigations into campus anti-Semitism? And how do you view the use of the IHRA working definition as a guiding framework in those cases?
Thanks. Ellie, I'm going to let you start on that as a prosecutor who is in a big university community.
Yeah, a prosecutor who is in a big university community and somebody who grew up here. And, my dad worked for the university. He was a professor there for a number of years, and, grew Jewish, of course, just like me. And I want to be clear on this. Cutting fundings to universities where there's Jewish faculty members, Jewish students, Jewish-led research projects that is going on, does absolutely nothing to combat anti-Semitism. it is harming people. It harms people of all stripes. But when you're harming people of all stripes, it certainly is not good for the Jews. So the Trump administration's efforts to really wage a war on universities using anti-Semitism as a cudgel is, in my view, beyond abhorrent and needs to be fought back against. Let's be clear on this. The Trump administration's issues with universities is not really about anti-Semitism or combating anti-Semitism. We have seen this administration be the culmination of a movement within the far right to discredit our universities, to discredit higher education, and to do so in a way that they seek to consolidate power. This is a playbook out of every authoritarian regime that we have seen in history, and they are using anti-Semitism as an excuse to defund universities and an excuse to go after universities, and it imposes real harm. We are talking not just about faculty and students who are impacted, but about potentially life-saving medical research that's going on university campuses that have their funding cut. We talked a little bit about criminal law and gun violence, research into how to prevent gun violence. That was something that at Eastern Michigan University, I know was cut by the federal government. It makes no sense, and it needs to be fought back against. That does not mean that there's not a problem with anti-Semitism on campuses or in our communities. And of course, we need to combat that, and we need to combat that in a real and meaningful way. But what that means is we should be working at the state level to look at the evidence. Where there is evidence there, we can use the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in education on the basis of religion, as a potential tool that the AG can use as a backstop. I am not comfortable right now, I'll just be candid, in the federal government's integrity here in this space, in the civil rights space. The Civil Rights Division's priority seems to basically be, preserving the rights of straight Christian white men. But that's where the AG can be an important backstop to combat anti-Semitism, to combat all sorts of civil rights violations, because we do have the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act that applies not just to our universities, but to institutions across Michigan. And for the remainder of the Trump administration, that is what I would seek to wield, in addition to fighting back against these efforts by the Trump administration to attack our universities under the guise of combating anti-Semitism, which again, I view as abhorrent.
Karen, do you have some opinions about the question that was raised?
I want to make sure I answer the question. So if you could repost it in the chat so I can see, but so that I can make sure before I finish my answer that I'm appropriately covering it. But look, I nobody likes the bullying that's going on. It is absolutely, I agree 100%, just part and taken right out of the playbook of somebody who is trying to basically implant authoritarianism. We can't have that. And likewise, we need strong leaders in those universities that will stand up to that. We also need to acknowledge when we have students on campuses that don't feel safe. And we know that that's true. We know that there are Jewish students on campuses all over this country that did and sometimes still do not feel safe. And that also has to be addressed. And students from any community. And I'm just not going to throw my hands up and say it has to be one or the other. You can absolutely do both. You can address anti-Semitism on campus and hold people accountable in the administration without using federal funding for very important things as a way to punish or bully or threaten. And the AG has authority to do that, and they very much should, because an AG has the absolute authority to make sure that everybody's civil rights are protected. But do I agree with the mechanism and the way that Trump goes about it? Absolutely not. His motives, I got to agree with Ellie. I don't trust the motives, and I don't trust the lack of transparency and the lack of consistency. But I also think we're not going to get where we want to be as Democrats and as just, parents by ignoring that there are students that don't feel safe on a campus.
Thanks. And Mark, I think Adam was going to try to put that question into the chat, but let us know. I mean, it's basically you understand the reaction to what the Trump administration is doing.
Yeah, no, I got it. I mean, let me just start out and say something quickly about the funding cuts or the threats of funding cuts. I mean, I share the skepticism of my colleagues about what's really going on here. I think it's a tactic. We've seen it again and again by the Trump administration. We've seen it in some of their comments about DEI. We've seen it to many of the major law firms if we go back several months. And it's the same playbook, right? Where the administration does not have the law behind them, but they are making threats. And many people seeking to avoid potential consequences, even though they have the law on their side, may well produce the behavior that the president is actually trying to secure. And so I think the AG plays a really important role for two reasons, or in two ways. One is certainly where there's the ability to sue the federal government, as AG Nessel has done many times with funds directly affecting our major universities, for sure. I think that's obviously has to happen, and it's very important. I think there's also a role to play for the AG in trying to embolden private actors, even when the AG doesn't have the ability, to try to embolden them that the law is on their side and as much as possible back them up so that they can make the right decisions. Now, I want to speak more generally to really the other issue here, which I think is in some ways the more important one, and that is the fact that no student should feel unsafe or threatened because of who they are or because of what they believe. And taking on anti-Semitism, taking on the other forms of hate that have proliferated in part because of a permission structure that our president has created is going to be in a very important responsibility for the next AG. And I think that involves a few things. It certainly involves listening and being engaged with communities, just like I tried to do when I was United States attorney. It means enforcing criminal laws where safety is at risk. It means using state powers on the civil side. Ellie was talking a little bit about this under the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, to pursue if there is a hostile educational environment where students really don't have equal access to education. Can't rely on the federal government right now. It's really a role that the state AG though can play independent. So I think those are at least a few things that we need our AG to do, given the threats that students face right now.
Thank you. And Adam, I think we have time for one more question. If you want to give us one that you have curated from all of the ones you've received.
Yes, let me pull one here. Just one moment. This is a question that somebody asked. They are asking, will candidates commit to protecting transgender rights?
Okay, let me kind of rephrase that a little with the idea of transgender rights, but also including some of the other rights that are guaranteed under Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, if you want to kind of expand on that. And we'll start with Mark.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. It's a really important one. Every person in America needs to be able to live their lives free from hate and discrimination, but that is not the reality in the United States that each of us lives in right now. And it's in part being driven by a president, again, who is creating a permission structure where hate is increasingly accepted. And we've certainly seen it in this space through policies that the president has pushed and through many, many statements he said, you can believe that I will fight for LGBTQ plus community because it's been something that I have been doing for several years. In 2015, I authored an amicus brief in the Obergefell case, the marriage equality case, on behalf of over 100 elected officials here in Michigan, so that the state of Michigan had a voice in that landmark case. And of course, we have seen many people talk about the fact that maybe this Supreme Court could overturn that case. And so we have to be ready to fight. I participated actually with Ellie Savit. We testified together before the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, really urging that commission to expand its reading of the word sex to say that the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act also protected against gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination. And we tried to get the commission to move on that, as many federal courts had done in similar contexts, even before the statute got revised when we had the trifecta. And so this is an issue that's been near and dear to my heart. My twin brother is gay. I saw that the experiences that he faced in our conservative Christian community growing up and how that continues to affect him today. And it's always been something that I've just tried to make a priority, and I'll continue to do so as Attorney General.
Thank you. Karen, what do you think you could do as Attorney General, to protect transgender rights?
When I was a sitting judge on the family court and was presiding over the abuse and neglect docket, we had so many children, and still do, that are in our foster care system and need adoptive homes. And prior to the legalization of same-sex marriage, we would have two same people in a same-sex relationship, but they weren't allowed to adopt a child. We had two people who wanted to parent and love a child from the foster care system, and the law would not allow that. So I was very proud when I presided over the very first same-sex adoption in the state of Michigan. And that, to me, solidified everything that I've been working for my whole life. People should be protected regardless of how they identify or who they love. And so when I took office, we immediately started pairing with Fair Michigan so that I could make sure that my office was supported and in educating our assistant prosecutors and our victim advocates about the special considerations that are present when you have victims of crime or witnesses that we're dealing with that are from the LGBTQ community. That's really important because there are so many things that are frightening to people from communities, particularly now, like that are under attack. I established our first ever human trafficking division, and we participate in a human trafficking task force. And so many of those victims are from the community transgender, and they are even more vulnerable because they're afraid to speak out. They're afraid to get help. We see that across the board in almost every crime that we charge. And so I think it's imperative that as the chief law enforcement officer, we highlight that. And we also celebrate everybody's differences. They've never even recognized gay pride before I got there. And we do that now proudly. We vigorously protect every single community and every single victim. And part of doing that is to partner with outside people and groups so that we can best understand that and also highlight and celebrate the differences of everybody in our own office. I've stood for the vulnerable people my whole life. I think that regardless of what the federal government says, I'm going to keep doing it. I stood up and fought for our reproductive rights right alongside with Ellie in that courtroom. And I'll continue to do that. And I think it's imperative that the AG take that kind of leadership and let every actor know, regardless of who it is, that there will be accountability if someone's rights are violated in that way.
Thank you. And Ellie, you have the last word.
Thank you. So, look, nobody should be subject to discrimination in education, in housing, in the workplace, in medical services because of who they are or who they love. I have a long history of fighting for LGBTQ equality. Mark mentioned our work together in front of the Civil Rights Commission. I was proud to file a brief on behalf of myself and we're all giving each other credit on this question. It's nice. Myself and multiple other elected prosecutors, including Karen, to get the Michigan Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act expanded to recognize sexual orientation as a protected classification. I was actually working for Justice Ginsburg at the United States Supreme Court when Obergefell was heard and decided. And one of my fondest memories, and something that I keep going back to, is the day that it was decided, going out on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court on a sunny June day and hearing the National Gay Men's Choir sing America the Beautiful in front of the very institution that just 20 years earlier not just didn't recognize their love for one another and their right to marry, but had in fact criminalized their love, right? And allowed states to criminalize it. It was a beautiful moment, and unfortunately, since then we've seen retrenchment. But I want to focus on protecting transgender people specifically, because LGBTQ is not monolithic, right? And it's the trans community right now, just to be honest, that is under the greatest level of attack. And so frequently, I will just say this: I am sick of politicians that have showed up at pride parades wearing ally shirts in the past 10 years when it was the popular thing to do. And now when trans rights are under attack, when we're seeing the trans community be attacked by the federal government and right-wing influencers, now we're worried about the polling. Now we want to stay quiet. If you're wearing one of those damn ally shirts, let me be clear. The point of an ally is you stand up to somebody, for somebody when they are being attacked. That's the literal definition of ally. And we need to be doing that right now with and for and alongside our transgender neighbors, because they are being particularly singled out. As Attorney General, I will do that. And one of the main things that we need to be doing is challenging unlawful federal actions which specifically target the trans community, and then also using our now expanded Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act as a backstop. One of the things that is chilling to me that happened in my community recently is the University of Michigan's decision to stop providing gender-affirming care under the threat of a federal investigation. I want to be clear on this. There is nothing to investigate. Gender-affirming care with parental consent is not illegal under federal law, and it's not illegal under state law, but the Trump administration was ever able to cow medical providers into ceasing to provide gender-affirming care to families based on an investigation into nothing where no law was violated. It's imperative that we stand up to that now, because if we think about it, it's not just going to affect the transgender community. If you are able to stop providers from providing a particular type of medical procedure simply because you say you're launching an investigation to something that's not against the law, tomorrow it could well be abortion rights. And the next day it could be vaccines, because we got Robert Kennedy as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And the next day it could be experimental cancer research. This is why it is important to stand up for every community, even and especially when they are under attack, and even especially when the attacks on them are gaining traction in some corners. We all know that poem that is engraved on in the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. First, they came for the communists. Then they came for the socialists. Then they came for the trade unionists. Then they came for the Jews, and there was nobody. I did not stand up. And then when they came for me, there was nobody left to stand up for me. Well, right now, it's first they came for the transgender community, and we damn well need to be fighting tooth and nail to protect our neighbors.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our participants. We have great candidates. That's one of the things that makes the Democratic Party different from other parties, is that we don't have duds. We have good candidates. We have great candidates. And it was really informative tonight. So I'm going to turn this back over to Decky to wrap up and let us know about what we need to be doing next.
First of all, Joan, I want to thank you so much for championing and actually moderating. It's always challenging to do this on Zoom. You did it with such style and such grace. So I'm really grateful and expertise. I want to thank you. I want to thank our whole caucus really want to thank our leadership caucus. I want to thank the amazing Laura, our secretary, who's been spotlighting and unmuting everybody and doing an amazing job. There's almost 100 people on this call, and so really having to navigate all of this. This is our first one, so we really do want your feedback on what worked and what didn't. So please send us an email. I'm trying to send this out. Let me make sure I get this to everybody here. They get this. We want to make sure that you, we want to thank the candidates for sharing their time and their expertise. As Joan said, our bench is really deep, and it's an honor for us to be able to present the voices and the candidates here in this forum. We want to make sure that you continue your participation in the Democratic Party, particularly participating in the convention. Here's the thing, this isn't a primary. You can't go to your poll place at the library and vote. If you want to really support any of these candidates, we really need you to come to the convention and register in the MDP. So we put something in the chat for you to do so. We'll also send that information out to you. You have to make sure that you are a member of the MDP 30 days before the convention in order to participate in the convention in Detroit on April 19th. So we'll make sure we follow up with you on that as well. Also, lastly, a whole bunch of you asked a lot of questions. We are going to get those questions to the candidates. This wasn't just an act of artistry and, performative. We really want to be able to give this information to the candidates because we know your voices are really important and your ideas. And we just had an hour and a half. And we hope that we can make sure to get those questions to all the people that participated today. Yes, they did change the date, so Shomer Shabbat can attend. So that's a great thing for Marla, and we want to thank our caucus for helping advocate that as well. So if you do celebrate Shabbat, you're able to participate in the convention this year. So thank you, everybody. We have another one, Secretary of State, next week. 6:30, please register. That really helps us get a sense of things. Rena Batch, who I just saw, who is our director of elections in Washington County, will be our moderator. We're still accepting questions, so please make sure to give us some questions for that. And I think that's it. Joan, did I forget anything else? Adam?
I don't think so.
I think you got it, Becky.
Okay.
Make sure you register as a member of the Democratic Party.
Okay, and also, yes, David Lauer can answer questions about membership to our caucus and pledge your support. There's other people saying where you can pledge your support for specific candidates. That's in the chat because the chat is open. And we will actually that's a good point, Ellen. We'll put out information to everybody that registered today to all of the candidates. So you can actually further find information on each candidate with their website and information so you can learn a lot more. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that as well. And we'll know, everyone you know to register and come because this was a remarkable event. And I want to thank everybody for doing it. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you next. Thank you. All right.